Once the recording is able to happen, I would like to welcome the Prime Minister.
Just a few seconds. Yep, start. Am I clearly visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
All right, Vansh going PM. I'll take a POI through chat, preferably from CO if not O. Cool. Starting my speech in three, 2, 1. I want to first start by a little bit of framing and characterization. Firstly, who are the leaders who actually end up leaving parties and forming their own or joining opposition parties? We think that these are pretty big leaders who have some cult of personality within society. They have followers within their own parties who are their underlings and whom they mentor, and they are their mentees. But also, public also sees them with through some sort of popularity and personality. Why is this the case? Because note first, small leaders don't often have incentive to move out of majority parties or ruling parties. This is true because small leaders often just want some sort of power within status quo, and the only way they can get that is by actually remaining within this party. Because if they move out, they literally have no other avenue because they're so small and so insignificant that no one else wants to take them and they can't start their own parties. Second, is I think that these leaders, therefore these leaders have bigger incentives to move. But how do they move? They don't just move alone. They probably also take their underlings from within the party and their followers that existed within the party. And this is important because the only point at which some other party accepts them is A, if they actually bring some other leaders along, so bring some other man force along. But second is that they want these leaders to be popular, so it's utile for these other parties to actually accept them into their party. Which is why, and also third reason why they're so popular is because initially these parties spend on these leaders a lot in order to promote them, in order to gain following, etc. Therefore, when they leave, they also have huge cults of personality. Secondly, what are the instances in which they leave? I think first is when they don't agree with the ruling parties or whatever party they're in, they don't agree with their ideology, their ideological differences, and it's just hard to exist within them anymore. Second is when there's internal instability, when there's a lot of dissent and there's a lot of infighting, and you can't come to a middle ground. That's the point at which you're incentivized to leave. The conclusion of all of this is that leaving one party doesn't happen in majority of instances. It happen in some rare and special occasions in which instances all of these conditions are satisfied. This outframes ops case of, hey, if people just going to do it all the time, it's going to lead to a lot of instability. Cool. What is the main argument then? First, I think that in status quo, these ruling parties have infinite power and therefore they tend to become complacent. Why is that the case? Note first, South Africa, or like Africa in general, is a place that is quite ethnically diverse. There are a lot of ethnic groups living within these states. Therefore, the easiest way in which parties continue to hold their power is by playing identity politics. That is by pitting the majority identity against, or majority group against the other minority groups, so they can crystallize their votes. Because note, identity is something that's crystal. It doesn't change. It is something that's generational. So if you get one person based on their identity, their children are also going to have same identity, and therefore they're also going to vote for you. Therefore, identity politics is the easiest way in which these people maintain power. But secondly, the judicial structures here are quite weak, so you can often send opposition leaders to jail quite easily because you have asymmetric media control and asymmetric control over the judicial system of the country. But also note that there are less check mechanisms, for example, from Western actors, because these countries don't let Western actors access their information, because they often have anti-West propagandas, because they spread narratives like, hey, we're colonized by the West, we shouldn't actually fraternize with them. But secondly, these leaders are quite dynastic in nature because they want to keep power within close circles. So you make your son your next leader. Therefore, a lot of power is just concentrated within one family and one closely knitted group of people. But third, insofar as all of this is true, opposition parties continue to get weaker and weaker because all these good leaders are concentrated within the ruling parties at opposition sides, since they're not allowed to leave. Therefore, oppositions just keep getting weaker and weaker because no investors also don't want to invest in them, insofar as they know that this party is going to lose and they're going to lose their money. It's going to be an incredible sunk cost for investors. So they only invest in the ruling party and never in the opposition party. Therefore, majority parties tend to become quite quite extreme in their policies, where they can pass whatever policy they want because there are no check mechanisms, and this is what harms people on the ground. How does this change at government side? Note firstly that leaders are the face of any party because the party wants to promote its leader the most. They are the ones who go to campaigns, go to rallies, give speeches, etc. Why are leaders so important? Note first, insofar as the leaders who leave are quite big, therefore they also bring a lot of traction to the opposing parties that they actually go to. But secondly, it also means that they also bring a lot of investors along because they come from a party that has succeeded and they already have existing cults of personalities. So investors also have more confidence within them. Therefore, they have more incentive to actually fund opposition parties on our side. Secondly, it also means that in many instances, the people who live are also quite dynastic in nature. So they've generationally gained people's trust. For example, if my grandfather voted for this leader, I also see this leader and glorify them, and therefore I also vote for them. So this is something that they bring along with them. Third is they also have third is that people often all opt into cultural personality more because they can see the charisma which the speaker speaks, so therefore they are attracted to the way in which this person speaks and the way in which they sell things, and not actually the policy that they pass. Therefore it's easier to get voters when the leader that you have in your party is quite charismatic and quite popular. Why is this incredibly important, and what's the impact of this? I think the first impact is simple. It gives more competition to the party that's actually in power and reduces the infinite power that they have outside opposition by actually providing them competition, because at this point, the ruling party face actual threat of being voted out. Therefore, they have now have more incentives to actually care and listen to people and therefore pass better policies that help them. Before further impacts, I'll take closing.
Opposition figures still exist, and the governments change in Africa. Not the whole Africa is South Africa. Like, you have dynamic democracies which have changed.
Yeah, sure, that might be true, but the change at opposition is incredibly slow as compared to on our side. Change can be better and faster because you get to keep a lot of power in check. And even if our case is just true in one country, that's still one more country that we benefit on your side. Nothing changes in that country. So probably the debate happens in vast majority of cases in this country alone. Therefore, these ruling parties are less complacent on our side of the house and they care about people more. Secondly, is that it generates more political discourse. And so far as opposition leaders also get more investment and they also get good leaders that go out to rallies, they're able to represent people's interests better. Therefore, in turn, people also turn out to listen to these rallies more and people turn out to vote more, which we think is voter turnout is important because it leads to more hope and representation of people. This is important because state controls your entire life. They form policies for you and they force you to follow these policies. Therefore, I think it's principally important that people feel represented within these policies so the dignity of life is maintained. But third, insofar as these leaders left because there was internal instability, at the point at which they leave, it means the party tends to become more stable. Therefore, there's less internal fighting within the previous party as well, which means they also have more time to now, more time and resources to actually spend on policy making and conducting surveys and thinking about what people need, other than just fighting these internal instabilities that continue to exist at side opposition. Therefore, the political scenario in Africa just on general gets better. Extremely proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the leader of opposition.
Okay, 1 second. I'm starting in 1 second. I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. We agree with OG that we are likely talking about politicians who are somewhat powerful. However, we do not agree that they are as powerful as the leading party, because otherwise they would have formed their own party from the first place. So we think they have power, but we think their power inside the party is much greater than their power outside the party. I'm going to prove to you why the change from within the party you are going to get on our side of the world is much greater. So I want to start with a point of framing, because we do not agree with OO that usually this happens because of ideological reasons. We think that this happens usually because of self-interested reasons of the politicians who change parties. Why this is more likely? First, about emotional mentality of voters. Voters are much more easily swayed and affected by psychological effect of us against them. Therefore, the politicians who change fringe parties are trying to make themselves look brave, and they make their base say, tell their base, I am a strong man who went against the corrupt leader of the other party, and try to make a mentality of us against them. This is what the most easily changes voters, because thinking about ideology is more deep. It takes more time to think about, and people think about it's harder to make. So OG actually agree with us that the idea of identity of politics is the most important factor. This first. Two, note that we are talking about politicians who have agreed to enter the main party or the powerful party from the first place. This means that they already have some connected ideology with the leading party. This means that they are able to negotiate from the win side. This means that they have made contracts with the party leader from the first time as they joined the party. This means that if they stay inside the party, they are going to get much more power. So this is my first point. Why it's much easier to get more power from inside the party. First, because we are usually talking about powerful party, as OG already agreed. This means that this party has more money, more subsidies, more political power, more media coverage, more ability to pass laws. This more ability to make to join important institutions and meet important people and so on. This means that in our side, that if you don't change parties, you are likely to get more power. Why this is true? Two reasons. First, because OG already agreed with us that we are not talking about a small, weak politician, but about a politician who has some power and he have some say within inside the party. This first. But two, because he already made contracts when he inside the party. So they already promised him things. If he won't leave, all these contracts will move away. What the impact of this? This impacts, for example, as we usually talking about someone who represents a specific sector within his country. He wants to build infrastructure for this sector. He wants to bring them education. He wants to bring them actual food and things like that. The only way to build long-term projects who take years to implement, roads that takes years to build, is to stay inside the party and not hopping between different parties. This is the first thing. But what happens in the comparative when you leave? Because OG tried to convince us that the main party will give him a carrot in order to make him convince him leave. We actually think it's quite the opposite. That is, they will use the stick and not the carrot. They will punish him. If in the first place, when they feel that they have less faith in them, that he is talking from other parties, that he might be abandoning them, just thinking that he may abandon us in the future will make the main party to not give him important rules in the first place, not put him in power positions in the first place, and not be letting him being able to represent his sectors in the first place, because if he gets more power, he might abandon us. The fact that this norm happens a lot inside OG means that the trust within the party becomes less. Now, I want to do the weighing here, because we are talking about the stick method. OG is talking about the carrot. Why the stick is more likely than the carrot? Because if the main party uses the carrot method, this gives the signal to other political members that if they try to resist, if they try to get more, then they will get a present for this. This will encourage other party members to betray more and more. This means that the main party is not likely to use the carrot method, and they actually use the stick. We'll want to continue. I'll take second half.
If these people had more power within the party, they would just stay. They wouldn't leave. It's plain and logical, simple.
You don't think if they leave, they don't have this much power. Their power stems from the contracts and connections from inside the party. Now to my second point, what happens in the comparative if you leave? Note that if you stay within the party, usually we are talking about people in the center who leave. Why this true? Because OG agreed with us that we are talking about people who are somewhat powerful, and that the only way to get so much power is to make some kind of leaning to the center, because this is the best way to get a lot of people supporting you. These actually are the only people who are able to mitigate and criticize the extreme part of the leading party. We think that if they are still inside, they are able to criticize the party from within. They are able to put the direction on their mistakes. Now, what happened in the comparative? In the comparative, note that in these main parties, each kind of criticism from outside is considered witch hunting, because it's considered them, the bad guys who are trying to criticize us and trying to prove us wrong, but they are self-interested. The only way to criticize the internal party in this kind of countries is the criticism from within, because this is the only way you can't delegitimize, don't get demonized because of your criticism. Now, what happens in the new world? In the new world, once these center people leave the party, the main party will try to differentiate themselves from the new emerging more central actor. The best way to differentiate yourself is to become more extreme. Why this is true? Again, voter mentality, especially now the idea thinking of OG, the desire to get your own identity and desire to play it emotional will become stronger on the main political people who is left within the party. This means that the main party will become more extreme. They will become more anti-minorities. They will send more tough police to minority places and make them punish minority more. They take more subsidies from minorities and give them to their central base. They put more national identity laws that are bad for identities. What are the impacts of this? In our side, we are able to get more subsidies, more infrastructure, more schooling, more education for a lot of sectors from the society. The only way to get power to these sectors is to play it from within. You are more powerful from within than you are in the outside. Please, OO.
All right, I would like to thank the leader of opposition for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister here.
Fifteen seconds. Am I both audible and visible?
Yes, you are.
Just setting up my timer. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The first claim from OO is to say, build a comparative that this leader should go ahead in the party and create power from within. The problem with this is that if they can create power from within, they have to align with whatever the party says because of 4 reasons. First, if you try to criticize party from within, parties are easily able to cover this criticism because the actors around which you are criticizing the party leaders are the ones who are the most honest or the most loyal to that party leader at the very first place. You're not criticizing that particular leader to the people who are outside this party, who are likely to be neutral or who are likely to support you. So you're likely to lose more and more support in the party because you probably do not even give alternatives to those people because you're like literally criticizing them and telling them why their party is bad, but still are being in this party. But second, your connections and investors that you have also lose confidence in you on side opposition because you seem that you're going to be expelled from this party anyways. But the problem is that at side opposition, you do not present them with an alternative. At least on our side, this leader can present them with an alternative, that another party that we can go to or a new party that we can form so to get power at the very first point. On their side of the house, the future of this leader seems grim because probably he's criticizing the party from within where he does not have that much power. And at a point of time, that is true. These leaders and these connections are also likely to lose him. The harm of this is that in future also, opposition cannot claim that this party leader can go ahead and form his own party. But third, being in the party also restricts the access to your resources because the resources in a party trickle down from the top to the bottom, right? So now if you want as a party leader resources in this party to criticize that party or to do anything bad to the party or to even climb the ladder, you need the check from that particular party leader to allow you to get those resources at the very first place. But also you have to distribute your investor money and your party leaders with other party leaders also because you are the part of the party and you are required to do so. If you do not do so, you're likely to be expelled on either ways. On side opposition, that is why the capacity of this leader also is largely restricted because he is not independent or free to use his own money because he has to distribute it, but also the money that he gets needs to be checked by the people who are higher from him in the power ranking. But fourth, you don't have to deal with the internal politics of your own party on our side, because it is your party, but also that opposition parties which are likely to be weaker are going to make you the party leader because they want to win and you are the figurehead that they are going to rely upon. So it is less likely that you have to deal with internal party politics or internal dissent on our side of the house. This proves that this party leader probably has more time to spend on things like policies or spend on things like popularizing himself, instead of just being suffocated in the party and just fighting with each other and creating internal dissent, which does not do any impact on the people outside this party because they never get to know this. The impact that you generate at side opposition is that probably in this short term, this party leader is able to criticize his own party, but probably after 1 or 2 months of criticizing, his investors lose him, his connections lose him, but also he's expelled from the party because now the party leader also does not have any incentive to keep him because he has lost all the leverage that he had over the party, but he also doesn't like the party. Therefore, the alternative that opposition now needs to defend is either this leader just gets out of politics in general or gets jailed, or either he forms his own party or joins another party. Why this leader has then power outside this party and is likely to be very famous. First, parties themselves have incentives to create these leaders the face of their parties, because oftentimes voters vote on figureheads and not party values or party commitments, etc. This is true for a couple of reasons. First, I think oftentimes voters don't have the capacity to understand a lot of understand a lot of party manifestos because they're often complex. But often in areas where in Africa, where education infrastructure is much weaker because of weak governments and them being free from colonialism very recently, it is less likely that people have the capacity there to understand government manifestos or understand what policies are good for them or not. Therefore, at a point of time, most people lack the prerequisite to even understand party policies. They defect to understanding whatever the party leader is and defect to things like more emotional appeal, etc. OO concedes that. But second, people often form their own personal relationships and own personal appeal with the party leader in comparison to that party. So literally, BJP is hinged upon Modi being the most charismatic leader, or Republican Party is hinged upon Donald Trump being the most charismatic leader, and that's why people vote for them. If that party leader goes away, the USP of that party also goes away because that party has put so much money in that leader to gain votes at the very first place. Why then this leader goes away and why majority parties are bad on side opposition? CEO asks a POI by saying that, oh, in Africa, you have dynamic democracies and democracies are good. There are a couple of reasons why African democracies especially are flawed and not like how CEO says. First, parties who fought against colonialistic powers in Africa, but also colonialism being fairly recent in comparison to other countries, puts democracies in Africa under threats of power capture, because parties who got you freedom are often able to defect to their own legacy and say that we are the best option for you, that we got you out of the hands of those evil Western powers, and often become complacent on this. But second, often due to ethnic diversities and various countries having vast divides in majority and minority ethnicities, opposition parties from other ethnicities can't ever come to power because majority ethnicities always vote on identity and always get that particular party into power. But third, due to high levels of poverty and weak infrastructure in terms of judiciary and media, call out has always been suppressed against dominant parties because there is no particular leader who has the capacity in opposition parties to call out that majority party, thus further disincentivizing people to not vote these majority parties out. Therefore, the system in Africa is largely dominant parties being in reign for 40-50 years and not being called out and becoming more and more complacent. Why majority parties become complacent? First, I think in general often become complacent because they have control over media and people. Therefore, they can easily do identity politics and have no incentive to defect to things like policies, which are much harder to do. At a point of time, they do not have any opposition party who can fight on things like identity because they'll always lose. These parties become complacent. Before that, POSEO.
You just assume that the incentives of the MP is good. We improve that his incentive is personal and egoistic, therefore he's going to get money and not going to advance his own pace.
I think it's first speculative to say that this leader is going to be bad, but even if he's bad, I think if he has conflicting incentives from the majority parties that he's going away from, I think that's still a net good because it at least gives alternatives to people on ground to vote for and do not have to go ahead and always live under the hands of the same political party who keeps oppressing them. Why political parties then on their side become more complacent? Second, Western criticism also doesn't work in Africa because they are seen as evil forces of colonialism and are often shut down. But third, opposition parties don't get funding on their side because there is no returns for businesses to invest them. So they get lesser money to campaign, etc., and often cannot do that. On our side of the house, when this particular leader moves, change is created. Why? First, alternatives for people to vote in. This is better because people get better representation on ground because this leader is likely to have differentiating views and policies from the majority party. But second, majority parties under more fear of losing power. They have to push for better policies faster now because now they cannot win on identity because that same leader with the same identity has defected and formed its own party. Therefore, the USP of majority parties go away on our side. Therefore, the only reason now they can win elections is by focusing more on policies. This is good because this impacts people on ground because they can get faster education, faster employment, faster healthcare. On our side, you save more lives because you are able to preserve the right to democracy, but also preserve because you are able to get faster and better policies.
All right, I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Okay. Firstly, as usual, if anyone wants to open their cameras, it would be so much more nice. But you don't have to, it's okay. Okay. Secondly, Rami, it was really nice debating with you. I'm really happy that you convinced me to come. Okay. Let's start. Now, notice that this debate is not a debate about where do we get more leverage, less leverage. This debate is about where do we get the balance point. Where do, on the one hand, we get representation to different kinds of minorities and different fractures, and on the other hand, when do we not get too much political pressure from parties inside of the government? Notice why this is the case, because as we agree with the OG, there are many different kinds of minorities and many fractures inside of those countries, meaning that we won't want to let one fracture have too much pressure in the government, and we won't want them to have less pressure. This deals already with CG's case that will come, I guess, about giving more power and stuff like that. We want to reach the balance point. I think it will be important in this debate later on. Let's start with understanding what actually helps the different fractures or minorities, however you want to call them, to get representation. Rami talks to you about three main impacts. First impact about inside change. He talks about today that those are politicians, not leaders, but politicians that do have power. They represent their own sector, their own minority and stuff like that. They can probably get, I don't know, 20 or 25% if they leave the party. And about how this politician can change today, and about how in the comparative, when this phenomenon exists, you firstly don't have confidence in those leaders. So from the get-go, the party won't want to give any leader too much influence, too much power inside of this big party for them not to take advantage of that and not to become too popular, meaning that we have the incentive of all of the different politicians to make each other less powerful, less effective, less good for the citizens. Second thing that Rami talks about is less divisive rhetoric. The fact that when you quit the party, when you go away, the main party that is powerful per the info side and see, oh, sorry, you can't run something else, I say that explicitly, has the incentive to have a rhetoric against the minorities, say that they are not like us, say that they are bad, and how this affects people on the ground, but by having more hate that is propagated by politicians and trickle to people that now needs to hate the other minorities more than they already do. We think this is horrible. We think the effects of that is discrimination, hating other people, and we think those countries are countries that already have tensions, and so making them worse is something that is very bad for them because they are prone to making those disputes violent. But thirdly, we think there is a very strong feeling of belongingness for minorities and for people inside of those countries when you have someone representing you inside of the main party. You feel like you are in the party. You feel like you can influence your life. You feel like you have someone that represents your interests, and this is in itself very important. Now, Notice that the main pushback we got on that is that from OG saying, okay, they will leave for good reasons when there is a lack of dispute or when there are fights. Firstly, we think that because this is a strong party, the party is a strong party, it is very unlikely that they will be effective in the day after this motion because of all of our analysis. And so we think what actually happens in the world is that there is a collective action problem game here. Everyone has lots to gain from getting out of the main party and the government. We think that politicians think for the short term and are very populist. We think, like Rami said, that voters are emotional. They think in an us against them way. Secondly, it is much more easy to criticize than to actually do. And thirdly, politicians themselves are emotional, meaning that most of the time those politicians leave the parties not because the parties are bad or something that they cannot control or they have absolutely no influence, but because they think for the short term. They have stuff to gain right now immediately, and they are emotional and cannot control themselves. But secondly, we think there are other different reasons that were not mentioned here. Things like corruptions, things like offering jobs when they quit the party, things that are much very common in those places. And so we think that the interest of the politician is not to represent their voters, but rather to be to have votes in the day after this motion in a good, like in the good case, but in the worst case, have more money in the day after this motion. Now let's talk about inside change, because the pushbacks we get are three. First pushback, there are a lot of yes men, and so you won't be able to commit change. Notice that this is really not true. Maybe there are yes men, but you represent your own sector, and if you are not good, your sector will say, we don't want this person representing us, meaning that the most important actor you should consider are the people that vote for you specifically, because if you are not the one that will represent your minority will replace you in someone more effective, and so you care much more about your minority. But secondly, they say, okay, in the comparative, you show an alternative. We don't think this is the case. No matter if you have an alternative, you won't be able to raise a government in order to use this alternative or actually to put it into fruition. We think this is the thing that is really important to voters, and this means that people won't vote for you even if you go away of the party just because they don't believe in the alternative that you really give. They don't believe that it will happen. The third thing is that, oh no, you will have no funding inside of the government, the party. Firstly, Rami's analysis about you not getting the confidence of the party, leading you to worse position and less places to influence. But secondly, why won't you have funding of your own? This is very weird argument. I'm not sure this is like in the debate. Before I continue, let's take an extension from CG. Okay, no extension, continuing. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about more criticism, because what they say is that we create an alternative for the voters. We think that here, inside accountability is the most important thing in this debate. Why? Because government side agrees with us that those parties are very powerful, control most of the field in someone's life, meaning that when we have someone from the inside that can represent its minority, that says it is not good to build here a road because it really hurts our indigenous lands or stuff like that, things that only they know because they have the knowledge, because they have the interest to push that bad policies are not happening. Notice that in the comparative, you firstly have no power inside of the different places where this policy is decided, but secondly, other parties have the interest to actively go against you because they know people from your minorities are not voting for them, and so they have the interest to firstly hurt your own people, secondly be against you, have rhetorics against this minority, and thirdly help their own base because now they are afraid of more people quitting the party, and so they want to hedge their risks in this way. So we create a much more fractured world. We create a world where minorities are more hated and have less rights, and we call you to oppose.
All right, I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Member of Government here.
Okay, sorry, panel. I was making my setup. It's pretty bad with the mess on the table, though electronics. Am I audible clearly?
Yes, sure.
Okay, I'm starting in 3, 2, 1. So I think we win over OG with 3 ways. Firstly, our case won't be contingent on these being autocracies or very bad democracies where there is so much corruption and literally it is very hard for systems to change. I think they mostly rely on these, their impacts mostly rely, as all clearly points out, on this contingency. We think it is fine. They're fine impacts. I think the majority of Africa, of course, isn't like this. We think there is corruption in Africa, of course, but as they say in the POI from CO, governments do change. We think this is a much more substantial part of this debate. But secondly, I think OG makes a mistake when they only choose to deal with large politicians leaving this party. They tell you that this is more that they are going to base their impacts on large politicians leaving this party. These are people who have lots of influence and all these things. Well, we think certainly sometimes large politicians leave parties. We think in usually majority of situations, people who are most powerful at a particular party tend to be people who are the most loyal, given that these power structures wouldn't choose people who are not as loyal or they don't or who they don't have lots of control over to be at such powerful positions. We think this is usually not the case. Probably it happens sometimes. We think it is fine, but our case is going to rely on everybody, on no matter the position, leaving this party. We think that even smaller politicians can bring a lot of dirt to these parties and ruin their image substantially. And thirdly, what is the basis of our extension? I think politicians leaving the ruling parties is so particularly dangerous to these parties because it uncovers lots of information and gives it to the opposition, to the people. It uncovers this corruption, which creates, which we think it is good because it creates lots of accountability. We think this happens in a couple of ways. Note that insofar as a politician is leaving, no matter small or big, is leaving a ruling party, this party, insofar as they are leaving, they're going to leave to still keep being a politician. They're going to leave, as the info slide says, to an opposition party or to create an opposition party. But the reason they're leaving the party, no matter what, is definitely that they do not want to take the votes out of the people who are already voting for the ruling party. This means that they're now wanting to cater to the oppositional votes. They want to form a new political career where they're going to ask for the oppositional votes to vote for them. They want to build a career in this other direction. This is a certainty. But the problem is, in these countries, insofar as you're in the government and now you want to be in the opposition voters have no reason to trust you. They see the government party as something bad, usually insofar as they are in opposition. They don't have a reason to trust you. In fact, they see you as some governmental plant into oppositional parties and all these things. They mistrust you precisely because they mistrust all of the policies that, the government side, the government has already been proposing and all these things. This is precisely why they're in opposition. But this means that for you to be able to prove that you're loyal to the opposition and that you're truly against the ruling party, you need to do a large effort of proving this. This means that you need to do everything you can to convince everybody in your country that you actually have changed your mind, that you're actually dissatisfied with your party, and that you actually now want to fight against them and aren't just doing this for a PR stunt. Because if no opposition party is going to let you into their ranks if they cannot prove to their voters that you have changed or that now you're truly in an opposition, because this is going to harm the oppositional party. This means that to even keep your career, you have every incentive to do everything as possible to bring all of the dirt and bring all of the things that you can to prove to the populace that you are now anti-government and loyal to the opposition. I think you do this. You have a large capacity to do this in so many ways. Firstly, you can openly talk about in the media about the political issues and how the ruling party is having bad political policies and leading country into the wrong direction. I think this necessarily creates controversy because somebody is exposing why these policies are bad. But secondly, you can expose all of the corruption which is happening within the party. You are probably able to prove this insofar as as you're within this circle, you have seen lots of this corruption. Note that this doesn't rely only on, terribly corrupt countries. I think every single country, if not, some Western countries have some forms of corruption in their government. I think there is always some corruption that you can uncover. And note that the more corruption you uncover, the more people trust you, because they see you actively stabbing your former party, which means that you have clearly now changed your mind and clearly now want to fight for the opposition. This is why you do this more and more as much as you're possible. But thirdly, note that you can bring the dirty laundry about other politicians. You can even bring personal stuff. Note, you can tell all sorts of stories about these politicians to delegitimize these politicians. This is also going to buy you, support from the opposition, because they see you now as a more legitimate person. But you have an incentive to do this as much as possible, to go constantly in the media and all of these things, to constantly be talking this story and building your career on the basis of this. Note, the beautiful thing about this is you can also lie. You can tell untrue stories about politicians. You can bring untrue, corruption, all of these things. The point is, insofar as you are an insider, people tend to believe you more, because they know that if the government was doing that, they still would be, keeping it silent, so you wouldn't even know. This is why people trust you. You have an incentive to blow up as big as drama as possible about how bad the governmental party is, to prove that you're legitimate now in the opposition. I think this is a very effective smear jobs for a couple of reasons. Firstly, note that insofar as this controversy and people watch this and all these things, lots of people watch the dirty laundries that you're bringing. Lots of people see this stuff. All of the population is basically talking about this. But note that as somebody who is an insider, you inherently have more trust within the people, which means that they think that you have sown all of these things. Note that just by saying in Africa that some politician at the ruling party is a homosexual is literally destroying their career, because they can never prove that they aren't a homosexual, insofar as it is illegal. Thirdly, note that insofar as you were in the ruling party before, you're probably familiar to the electorate which votes for this ruling party. You're probably familiar to them because they saw you on the political billboards, marketing. They saw you at some rallies, political, all these things. Even if you're, you just have to be a moderately important person at this party, and you already have at least some of the voter base who is voting for this party trust you a little bit. They trust you a little bit insofar as they have, previously seen you support them and be supported by the president and all these things. This means that they have at least some level of trust within you, which means that you have much more ability to actually sway these votes, and you have much more ability to sway their opinions about the ruling party. For all these reasons, I think because it creates such a large drama and because it uncovers so much bad things about the ruling party, this is very dangerous for the ruling party. I think this is very good for a couple of reasons. Firstly, insofar as you bring up all of this corruption and all these problems, you give more information to the public. I think journalists and courts catch up with these things. They're much more able to investigate this corruption now. But secondly, insofar as this is very damaging to the party has an incentive now to be prepared for all of these things. Insofar in the info slide, we are told that this happens often. This means that these governmental parties have an incentive to, try to do less corruption, because they know at some point somebody is going to come out of the party and rat them out. This means that they have more risk on doing corruption. We think this is a very good thing, because it makes these parties more accountable and less likely to do corruption for all the reasons I have thrown.
All right, I would like to thank the member of government for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the member of opposition here.
You can give me a minute just to set up all my stuff. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Everybody presumes that accountability does not exist in the status quo already. And also presumes that some parties are inherently better than others without any additional analysis. We from CO believe that all parties are broadly very similar, trying to combat very similar issues, and thus are just reliant upon specific politics and politicians which have ethnic connections, but also more deeply that the very fact of switching parties creates instability in the system, which therefore increases risks for potential investors, and investors are the only way in which Africa in general, but more specifically individual states, can develop and leave the Dutch disease trap. Okay, what is the core fact about these political parties and why they all have broadly similar incentives to behave well? First of all, you have elections, meaning that people can choose one party over another regardless of ethnic lines in order to improve their standard and quality of life. Whether this quality of life be in Kenyan elections, for example, who can give you more money to vote for them in the election, or anything else to your own choosing, you already feel to an extent represented because you already have a choice. Second thing is why these parties broadly behave good. Secondly, they have post-colonial internal ideologies. They see growth of their own individual states as restitution to what happened before, and also they have an idealization of self that they want to inherently fix all of these things. Thirdly, they have significant amounts of international aid, which is contingent on actually fixing shit. Thus, all of this stagnancy, which opening government claims, never proves why. Only reliant on the political systems, we also prove why political systems force actual adaptiveness. And secondly, why you also have external influences which force you to actually fix shit. Meaning, and also fourthly, they have loyalty to their own peoples. You have an inherent sense of representation, thus you want to fix shit. Meaning, alternatives also have the same thing. Why? Because they function within the same political system. They have the same ways of media domination, like regardless of whether the ANC rules or the EEF, the only thing which change is the change itself, firstly, and secondly, some very specific, very radical policies that EFF is already proposing. But also notice, like, there are just some states which cannot be fixed, such as South Africa. Like, South Africa's energy grid is going to shit regardless of who rules the country, because it has been neglected for so many times. What are the important states are the states which are stuck in the Dutch disease stage of their own economic development, such as Nigeria, which are significantly reliant on resource extraction and on what internal corruption keeping investments coming. Okay, so why are politicians shifting from one side to another, significantly destabilizing, and why is this irregardless of any analysis from opening side? First of all, most of these votes are 6 minutes. Most of these votes are ethnic and tribal votes, meaning that often, and because the continent of Africa in itself is very, very diverse, and also specific nations such as Nigeria, such as Kenya, they have significant amounts of local ethnic diversity, meaning that politicians are far often tied to their own ethnic lineage and their own familial connection and familial membership to tribal classes before post-colonial societies. And also, secondly, because you already have a colonial legacy of some specific families or individuals being instituted in power, in popularity, meaning that people just already have a predisposed preference to vote for some person because of their ethnicity and because they have already been subordinate to them, like generationally, meaning that you already feel represented regardless of what party you vote for, because you vote for one specific individual, which is that individual who switches parties. Meaning, on both sides, you're already connected to politics, meaning that the amount of representation you inherently feel doesn't change. So what specifically changes? The things which change are numbers. What numbers specifically? The numbers of votes which one party is getting or another, and the way in which it changes is highly unpredictable, which makes it inherently risky for parties who already exist there. Notice that OG proves higher frequency of change. CG proves higher amount of digging shit up. Both of these are incredibly risky for parties because they often rely on specific government contracts, which may be deemed corrupt by these politicians who are trying to expose them, meaning that every amount of additional exposure and every amount of additional policy shift, which is highly frequent due to the fact that politicians shift around, or even if it is rarer, the very fact that it exists poses a risk for these companies. Meaning, like, also additional mechanisms. This also tends to create a higher number of parties, which is far harder to predict when you're calculating risk, meaning that you're automatically going to put a higher risk on any potential investment in these states. Also, a higher number of personnel shifting means also a higher number of policy shifts. This is true regardless of the outcome, because of the different ways that these groups interact and the different priorities which each individual politician has. Meaning, the more change you have, the less knowledge it creates for investors, institutional or otherwise, meaning that the risk exponentially goes up. What does risk going up? And also, this is external view, because you have a risk increase, and you also secondly have a fear of nationalization and radical policies being passed by fringe parties, which now have suddenly a far higher chance of actually making it into parliament. Yes, OG, then I go impacting.
If your framing is true and parties have similar ideologies, they have incentives to form coalitions and move towards a one-party system, which reduces accountability. And we also showed they are skeptical towards Western actors, therefore they can't keep check. This is what we saw.
No. even if they're skeptical towards Western actors, they still have IMF loans which they need to pay off. Like, holy shit, you still have trade, you still have other insane incentives. But also notice that even if they are not like ideologically similar, they have very simple issues which they need to fix. This is why they're broadly the same. You do not need to all have overarching policy for the whole world, such as the America or US or Russia does. You need to fix roads, bro. This is regardless of any specific economic, political, or ideological situation. You have very similar incentives that you're going to end up doing very similar things. The only thing which changed is the amount of policy shifting out, and also very specific, very radical policies for which people tend to vote for. Meaning, like, even if policies are broadly similar, often companies depend on direct connections with individual personnel in order to ensure trust and lower risk, meaning that you still depend on one specific party, regardless if the political program is completely the same. What does this mean? It means people are more afraid to basically invest in these states. This means hundreds of millions of potential investments gone, but notice also local investments which are already there are afraid to invest because they do not know how the next government is going to be treating them. How much corruption do they need to give to the next local representative which is going to be in the region in order to continue going on to their normal business? When you already have things which are set in stone, you know what to expect. When you know what to expect, you are far more willing to give money. This money means jobs for people who would otherwise be homeless, who would otherwise have no job opportunity due to the fact that there is a high unemployment rate generally in Africa, but mostly in Western Africa, which is highly impacted, as we already see from the info side. Guys, the only thing which changed is instability, which becomes far higher. People suffer directly because they do not have access to investments, which they otherwise would have vote closing opposition.
All right, I would like to thank the member of opposition for the clarifying speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the government rep here.
So I think that the main point that we get from CEO is that will cause an instability that will deter some investments from going into the country. But notice how per their analysis, because these countries depend on the foreign direct investments, and they also corrupt the politicians. That's how politicians gain money, and they hugely depend on these investments. That means that all of these politicians, that even if they're shifting in and out of the party, have the same incentives. They have the incentives to get as many foreign direct investments, so people have food, so they do not protest, so we don't have instability when it comes to nationalism and everything else. But secondly, all of them want money from all of these, corporations that want to come. They all want to get corrupted by them. They basically depend on them. So I don't think that you will get any, kind of instability that actually affects the corporation. But secondly, there's a fear of nationalization. I don't know why this one person that was probably against nationalization, that person who switches to another party will now be pro nationalization. But lastly, because there is democracy, people probably fear nationalization because this would probably deter all of their foreign direct investment, firstly. But secondly, it would cause such instability that there would probably be a civil war, something like this. So I don't think that there is any fear of nationalization, that this isn't in anyone's interest. But let's move on to our case. So what does Obra tell? Obra tells you that basically just the act, just the possibility of these politicians leaving the party, this creates an interest basically to cater to their interests. So firstly, on a clash, whether or not these politicians have good interest or not, this is clashing opening opposition. They tell us that they are self-interested, but I think if they want corruption, if they want money, you just stay in your party that is the main political party. You just appease all of your higher-ups because this party is in power. You'll get a lot of corruption. You'll have a lot of money. So I think that people who are corrupt, who want their self-interest, you probably don't go to other political parties because this is an unpredictable decision. You don't know whether or not you'll give the money, whether or not you'll be political popular. So these aren't the people who are basically threatening to leave. Secondly, they tell you that the parties will start giving these politicians less power. But firstly, I think that you have to give them some power. You know, everyone knows who the minister is, who the head of the agency is, and they all have them some jurisdiction by law. But secondly, they also have the incentive to promote themselves when it comes to their policy, when it comes to social media, when it comes to rhetoric, and basically all of these people, you know, all of these people are probably well known to some extent. But secondly, even if they are not well known, our case doesn't depend on it. Obra tells you that people believe you no matter what, because you're an insider, because you know all of these people, and they probably trust you because you have the right credentials. So what is the awakening? Notice how these parties, basically the chance of you possibility leaving and smearing them with a lot of these dirty laundry, and basically you losing popularity with these people and people starting to question you, and also this leading to fracturing of your political party, this is a much bigger incentive than you not giving them power. Because I don't know why these parties necessarily hate minorities. I think it's much better for these people to actually appease the people who want to help the minorities and generally, you know, want to make the party more efficient than just you know, giving them less power. Because if you give them less power, this also increases their possibility of leaving. So who are these people? These people are probably the ones who want to, you know, who have good interests, who want to, you know, make the government more efficient, who also want to lower the level of corruption, because if they didn't, they would just stay in the party. So I think we get much more change on our side of the house. And what does opening opposition tell you? They tell you that they would have more power within the party. But if they would have more power within the party, they just wouldn't leave. They would just stay in the party. This isn't what this debate about. I think that these people probably know whether or not they would have more power when they're inside the party or when they are outside of the party. And lastly, notice how all of these so why do we weigh against opening governance? For a couple of reasons. Firstly, we are not contingent of these politicians actually being successful. Notice how opening government gives you millions of reasons why why it is very hard to be successful, because the government controls the media, controls, you know, politicians, controls the rhetoric and everything else. Insofar this is true, this is very hard for these politicians, you know, to make any change. But secondly, notice how they are contradictory. They say these people are the people who do not have power in their government, but secondly, they have a cult of personality. Notice how insofar they have a cult of personality, they could probably achieve some changes per their analysis. So they're contradictory on this claim. We're not contingent, firstly, on this being a corrupt country. This basically applies to every single party inside of Africa. But secondly, we don't necessarily depend on these people being necessarily that popular, because people would trust them either way. So I'll take opening opposition. Yeah.
Top half and the info side agree, those parties are strong parties. This means that your impact about revealing corruption is unlikely to influence them, and that CO's impact on
but you know, when this is a trend, when a lot of politicians basically start, when this is a known trend that is happening per the motion, this means that there is huge possibility that a politician will leave. Notice how this isn't one instance that this happened. This can happen tens of times. Insofar this happens a lot of times, this really threatens your ability, you know, to govern, your re-election possibility. And notice how these parties would much likely appease these people, because this is something that is easier to do than risk the chance of them actually, you know, bringing in dirty laundry. Please stop smiling. It is kind of unpleasant. So lastly, what do we tell you? We tell you that firstly, we get a lot of characterization. How does this look like when these people leave? They give out a lot of dirty laundry. Secondly, they also have their people around them questioning the party and everything else. So this means a lot of media pass that these bigger political party is got. So whatever. So basically, we do not depend on them being successful. Just the threat of them leaving is enough for these governments to be less corrupt and to do more efficient policy. So vote closing.
All right, I would like to thank the government for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the opposition with Pierre.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Notice the brilliant framing of my partner. The framing about parties being similar, having similar incentives but also capacities, washes down this entire debate. We say the metric on which you should judge this debate is whether or not and on which side you have more stability. Now notice why this is the most important thing in this debate. Notice that most African countries are developing countries, meaning that they are in dire need of investors coming to their country, getting them jobs, getting them infrastructure, and all of those things. Notice that investors who are more likely to invest in these markets for two reasons. First is that this is untapped market, and second is that this is going to create long-term collab between these how should I say countries and investors is now changing. But also notice the current investors who are helping African countries are now, because of this instability and because of this trend, going to leave and go somewhere where it is more stable. Now, notice MG says, closing government says that everyone in these political parties is going to be the one leaving. Notice this works perfectly for our case. This makes parties break up, creates more internal conflict. This means more instability, worse malfunctions of the political party, but also less policies for minorities being passed. This is the gap which all needed. But furthermore, notice the main case is that you are now going to go against the beast. You are going to take their dirty laundry and you are going to show that to everyone. I have a few problems here. First, notice that they prove no incentives of why you are not corrupt as well. And secondly, that this is going to work. I have 5 reasons why this is inherently not going to work. First of all, notice that people inherently don't trust politicians. Secondly, notice that this happens a lot. A lot of politicians go out and say we have dirty laundry, meaning that people are then incentivized by this. Thirdly, they do not know your incentives for this dirty laundry and stuff like that. Fourthly, it is not proven why a political party is going to let you in after you pull out dirty laundry. But also, why would people believe you? They don't know even who you are. If you are a small politician in a big party, they even don't know about you, meaning that their case is completely out of this debate. But furthermore, notice they say you are now going to expose corruption and it is going to create less corruption. What does dirty laundry even mean? It is never proven to us. It is just too vague. But furthermore, notice that per their analysis and per OG's analysis, the ruling parties are the ones that are controlling media, meaning no capacity for you to do this and for people to believe you. And thirdly, notice that these ruling parties, as per their analysis, are extremely corrupt, meaning that they are going to try everything in their power to bribe you, to threaten you, to stuff like that, meaning that your capacity is the one changes. Notice their pushback on us. They say politicians have incentives to help people and have incentives to get people more money. Notice the issue here is not politicians' incentives, but capacity. Also, we don't care about politicians. We care about incentives of a political party. But also notice, investors don't care what your incentives as a politicians are. If they see something that is creating instability, you don't invest. This is not a sufficient response. Now, let's move on to OG. No PIs. On to OG. Notice that their framing is about leaders leaving and their instances of them leaving actually work our case much more. They strengthen them, meaning that if this is true, it creates more instability. You lose valuable person, meaning that these politician parties are now going to be much more fucked and stuff like that. But furthermore, notice that most of their mechanisms are just an assertion. There is no analysis. They say this is bad. We say that this promotes stable political situation. But also notice their main impact is that opposition parties are going to be weaker on our side. Notice we actually flip this point because politicians on their side are going to have weaker opposition because there is less chance of coalition because you are a traitor and people do not believe you. They do not trust you. You have different values and stuff like that. But secondly, less parties are going to be formed because of their mechanization about this leader being strong and having a lot of votes and stuff like that. We flip this point and lesser their positives and increase the harms. But also notice, they say that it is good because you are now going to have a good chance, good, faster changes and stuff like that. Their impact is actually excellent for our case because this means worse government malfunction, more frequent policy shifts, and more instability and more instability and less predictability, meaning investors have less of a chance to invest. But let's deal with something that lands in their case, and this is the only thing that lands.
Yeah.
They say you get better representation. Notice this is just an assertion. This new party is going to necessarily be populistic because they want to get as many votes as they can. Secondly, now it's harder. Many similar things, how should I say, many similar things are harder to vote and stuff like that. But also notice, OG doesn't explain the capacity of the new party. How will they get funds? Funds that are needed for campaigns, commercials, and so on. But also for analysts and experts, they are going to identify the problems which give you most votes and stuff like that. Second, what will their politics be as a new person in this party? Never proven. And thirdly, why will people vote for a person that is literally a traitor? Doesn't this make it counterintuitive? Because notice, this sends a signal to voters that you might do this again, meaning that their vote is less valuable, meaning you have less fucking representation. Now, on to all and how we clearly win this debate. They say politicians want good and it's better for them to stay in the party. Notice, they never prove the incentives of them being good. Here's 5 reasons why we beat them. First of all, our impacts target more people. These are jobs, these are policies for minorities, laws, stable infrastructure, and stuff like that. Our clash with government side is far better. We beat OG with our case, but furthermore, we managed to flip their points, showing you that you get more harms on our side. Thirdly, our case is less vulnerable to attacks. You can see that because CG Whip didn't know what to answer to us. Well, he spent majority of time rebutting them and stuff like that. Our mechanisms are less vague and we are more in motion. But also, our case is not focused only on minorities. Their case doesn't beat ours because it doesn't solve issues of Africa. We are the ones to do this. Also, next time, try to front stab more and you might beat us.
All right, I would like to thank the opposition whip for the very fine speech and everyone there for fine debate. Cross blood, shake hands. Leave the breakout room. Hope good luck for advancing on next round.
Thank you. Good luck.